Hello, 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 hello. Welcome back to King Pilled. I am Matt. The weird black box next to me is Cooper. And if this is the first time that you are watching us, welcome. We are streaming on YouTube. We're streaming on Twitter. We're streaming on Facebook. You can follow us on any of those platforms. At Real King Pilled on Twitter. Cooper Brooks is at Cooper Brooks on Twitter. And today we are joined by a very special guest. This conversation has been a long time coming. I've been wanting to talk to this guy for a while. The Prudentialist, the frog himself, is here to join us today. Welcome, sir.
Very happy to be here. It's a pleasure to talk to another Matt, so it's always fun.
Oh, nice. Yes, absolutely. Best name in the world. Gift of God.
Yes.
Yeah, shut up, Cooper. I've seen your streams with Oren McIntyre, and you are always your when you decide to face fag with the rest of us, your presentation is impeccable. The 3-piece suit, the tightly manicured mustache, and everything. So, in honor of you joining us today, I decided to dress up as well. This is the outfit of my people.
Hey, I have some things to say about the whole aesthetic you got going on. I really dig it. It's kind of like you remind me of like a saloon owner in the 1860s Wild West or something. It's really cool. But might I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Start smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey so you can get a little rasp to your voice and you could really sell the whole thing.
Oh, well, the problem is that drinking is a little limited due to a kidney transplant, but I'll tell you what, man, smoking ain't a problem. Well, it is a problem, but I miss smoking, but I used to do it quite often.
Okay, well.
I could just put on the raspy affectation, and just start looking at you like it's a 1990s tombstone type deal, but we'll get there when the day comes.
Cooper was trying to talk like me earlier, and I just laughed at him. He's got his little Cooper squeaky voice, and he was.
Well, someone commented before we went live. They said that the thumbnail for the video looks like something from the Muppet Show out of the 1970s, where Kermit talks to like a famous celebrity of the time. And so, instead of the Muppet Show, sex and violence, it's the Muppet Show, right-wing Twitter.
Yes. I had some guy reply to the stream we did yesterday. I streamed out on Twitter, and some guy quote tweeted it and said something about like how girly the presentation looked or something like that. And he was just mad about right-wing podcasters talking about right-wing things. So I just retweeted what he said. I thought it was funny.
Well, it's funny too, because I had a moment like that where I try really hard not to cross the podcasting world with my IRL church life, but I dropped off one of our 2024 like church calendars to a parishioner who was working on Sunday, and she was like, I know you don't like crossing that line between your online self and your church life, but my friends found you and Gio streaming the Digital Archipelago on Twitter, and they were ranting and raving like, why are these two fascists on my timeline? And it's just like, I wouldn't even call myself one of those things, but I'm glad that I managed to annoy one of your like liberal friends.
Does your parish, do people like know that you lead this double life?
I try to keep it to not make that happen, but unfortunately, it's kind of crossed over now. We have an inquirer, soon to be catechumen at my parish, who, when he first started visiting, he was like, I recognize your voice. And I was like, oh no, it's the end of the world. But it's a matter of time, I guess. But I mean, my priest knows who I am. So I mean, because that makes confession a lot easier.
Yeah. Like maybe a month and a half ago or something like that. My priest, we did a reader service because my priest was sick or something like that. But in Trapeza afterwards, I'm sitting down just chatting with my deacon. He's like, "Oh, by the way, I like the stream you and Matt did the other day." And I was like, "What? Oh no!"
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, I think. So you just have to embrace it when it comes.
The stream in particular that he was talking about, like, we were not producing this with the expectation that clergy would be listening to us. So it was very rated R for a variety of reasons. And then we found out that he's actually been listening to us for a long time, and he listens to Buck Johnson. And so I actually attend the same parish as Buck Johnson. I never got my priest knew who I was before I ever went to the church. So I never got the ability to maintain any sort of anonymity or even pseudonymity. I just kind of had to lean into it. So what, I guess the first question we would ask you is, what's your social security number?
Oh, well, I'm an older man, so just 1 1 1 1 1 1 1 2.
Okay, I hope somebody was writing that down. Um, real question though, like, so you obviously you're Orthodox as well, but you're also a relatively prominent figure among our guys on Twitter, the right wing, whatever. I don't know. We know who we're talking about when we talk about it. We don't need to give them some sort of demeaning name.
Yeah, this thing of ours. Yeah.
Yes, yes. What's your background without doxing yourself too much? Obviously, how did you get to this point?
Well, I was raised in sort of a very, I guess, Republican-friendly household. I grew up as an army brat, so I meet the literal racialized connotation of the word rootless cosmopolitan because I moved around like every 3 years due to my dad's army job, and so I grew up during the War on Terror. So my entire like young life was understanding that like Team Republican / Team George W. Bush were the good guys, and that Team Democrat was not in my best interest. And then you grow up in the Obama years and soon to be the Trump years when you're in college to recognize that everything that you were sold on as a young adult about the world and how things are supposed to go was sort of a lie to some extent. And then also the other guys are equally liars and equally awful. So it's been trying, I guess, to deconstruct my own neoconservative-esque George W. Bush social conservatism, compassionate conservatism upbringing. And so I got involved naturally in Republican politics when I was in high school and college, and I turned 18 when I was in high school, and so I had this deep sense of sort of like civic nationalism, of belief that the Constitution is sacred, voting is a sacred thing, because I was raised to believe that. You watch your dad do things like to swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic, like that holds a special kind of value in your heart. And then you realize no one believes that around you at all whatsoever, and that voter participation is low as can be. No one cares. Everyone writes off everything. And the more you get invested in the game and in politics, you find out that there are like 20 other guys that have the same beliefs as you, and that they're all equally heartbroken when they realize the game is about knife fighting and screwing each other over in dark alleys to ensure you're the one that gets hired for this internship or hired for this staffer's office and nothing like that. So from there, I think Trump kind of radicalized everything. Like when he was running for office in 2016, I was thinking, well, the more moderate factions of the party could maybe like make this work in some fashion as he became the front runner. And then quickly throughout his administration, I realized that all the things that he wanted to get done were happening by executive authority, and he had to sacrifice his agenda for tax cuts and things like that. And it was soon this quick realization that maybe the world of like Frank S. Meyer and the National Review was a bunch of crock of crap. And so you start reading a lot of philosophers, and I read a lot of comm theory in college. And I found that stuff to be particularly interesting, how communication shapes our politics. But my degree is in political science, international relations, and U.S. history. So I double major, focused on the Constitutional Convention. So I deep love for American history, deep love for how the world works in international relations and empire. And I guess throughout the rest of my years and starting this, you grow up in college as a lot of white guys. You just kind of grow up innately political. And you start listening to people on the internet. Everyone's got their like, oh, who did you start listening to story? And this is the one thing that like the left was definitely right about, that there was a pipeline with like YouTube and Twitter and the algorithm. Like they were 100% right on that. That's why they had to do the whole adpocalypse thing in 2017. And it was great because then you got to be exposed to people like Carl Benjamin and Dave the Distributist and the rest. And I moved in 2019 to where I live now, which is in an undisclosed location in the middle of nowhere, Texas. But from there, three things kind of happened at once. I moved to small town rural America, where I realized people still cared about their kids' education. They knew their school board personally. They still went to church on Sundays. They took care of each other if a storm went through. I, noticed that these people were, genuinely invested in their community, which was something I never grew up experiencing. Because at the time, in a previous, more secular life, I had a girlfriend living with me, and she was like, well, why don't we talk to the neighbors? And I was like, your neighbors don't even speak the same language as you. Like, you need to understand that you don't live in a high trust society anymore. And so that helped a lot. Two, I think, was my own personal health crisis. I had kidney failure, which led to dialysis, and spent a lot more time podcasting when you're sitting on a dialysis chair for 4 hours. And then I had a bunch of free time because then COVID hit, and I bought all the stuff to make a gaming PC. I was going to do what all the other boring white guys on YouTube do. They just make video review essays of their favorite games. And then I was listening to these people argue on strategy. It was like Dave the Distributist, academic agent, and Don the Pleb arguing about political approaches. And I was like, oh, I can do that, because I'd always been asked in polite liberal company to give the polite milquetoast conservative opinion that's slightly different from the libs. So I made a Twitter account, made a YouTube channel, and God has blessed me with growth, audience, and the opportunity to talk to people like you guys.
I was wondering when you were going to end.
Well, like Semiagog, I'm not a terse man. Sorry, Cooper.
Yeah, I'm just
You're in
kidding.
good company.
The real question, or, kind of working with that. What's your favorite Dark Souls game?
Oh, boy. Probably Dark Souls 3.
Yeah, it's a good choice.
Well, it's got the nice level design of Dark Souls 1 to some extent, but it has the speed of Bloodborne. It all works out great.
Right. Yeah, that was my introduction as well. Anywho.
Good
So
questions,
when
though,
did
Cooper.
I don't add much.
Well, no, it's the video game question. Those are the important questions. I feel like it's like a physiognomy check. A man's taste in video games is a good way to get a gauge on his views.
Mhm.
Well, I was after you got done with your monologue, I was actually going to call you a nerd, but then I was,
Well, then you'd be
I'm
right.
about to ask him about Dark Souls.
Well, then you'd be right.
Okay, all right.
I am a nerd. That's okay.
After Cooper listened to your conversation yesterday, he listened to the conversation that you had with Dimes, and first of all, he said he sent it to me, and he said, "You need to listen to this. This is what we've been talking about. These are our guys." And the second thing that he told me was he said something to me about Dark Souls, that he was excited that you'd mentioned Dark Souls, and he wanted to talk to you about Dark Souls.
Works for me. I can do both. It's no big deal.
So what in the hell is going on? Like what is happening over the past couple of weeks? It seems like we're having years of history happen in days, and everyone is debating about whether happening is happening, or if the happening is not happening, or if the happening is sort of semi-happening. There's all kinds of crazy shit going on right now. What is your take on it?
I feel like everyone's take on it is entirely dependent on their own kind of secular eschatology. This is the big debate, I think, between like the not happening gang versus happening gang on Twitter. I think Charles Haywood is a big proponent of this when he talks about like regime fragility. He did that whole 10,000 word essay about how weak the regime is a couple of years ago, and he was naming right-wing Twitter anons in his essay about it. And I think it has a lot to do with how you view your timeline for, I guess, collapse, or maybe the scarier idea that things just don't collapse. They just progressively go down this gradient of things slowly getting shittier. And as for me, how I view it is that there is a regime that is acting like a Dutch boy at a dike, and he's slowly running out of fingers and toes to plug his holes in. And the water is probably beginning to leak in some places that he's not happy with, because you look at, for instance, the war in Ukraine, which has been this
maybe right in his
yeah,
eyes.
something's hitting him in the eye. It's one of those unfortunate camera shots where the fluffer didn't get out of the way, but it does illustrate a.
Yeah.
I just Anyways, I'll pay for that one later, I'm sure. But the issue is,
I won't tell anyone.
Well, that's okay. Clergy listens to this. We're in real trouble now.
Yeah.
But no.
Don't worry, the kids have jokes.
The
It's
kids
all right.
have jokes.
We've informed them before.
We're funny. Don't worry. But no, the reason why.
Yeah, guys, I'm funny. I
swear. No, so how it works is take the war in Ukraine, for instance, the sort of long overarching foreign policy initiative to keep Russia and Germany sort of separated. This is why you have a lot of interest in Poland and Ukraine. 2, you have some people in the State Department with an ethnic animus against this region. 3, you wanted a more Western bloc that has expanded most of the former Soviet territories to do so. The war occurs. Well, what happens in that part of the world? Well, there are 2 semiconductor companies that work specifically for semiconductor grade neon, which is necessary to make semiconductors. Roughly 50% of the world's semiconductor grade neon comes out of Ukraine, and a good chunk of wheat exports to the UN World Food Program come out of Russia and Ukraine. That's why the Black Sea deal has been so important in this whole conflict, to get things out of that area. But great. Now we have the neon problem. Well, what do? Well, we immediately pass, in response to this, the USA CHIPS Act, and that'll hopefully help counter our balance with China. And we have all this conversation about the Davidson window. Well, what's the Davidson window? Well, it's this whole thing about China and Taiwan, and maybe we have to go to war with them by 2027, so we need to stock things up. Hopefully this war will end soon. And then the war hasn't ended soon, so now we have to move all this production back to the United States. And that becomes the USA Competition Act. And so you're just seeing one thing topple on top of another as the United States tries to maintain its presence abroad. And this is where you get the Niccolo Saldo point about Turbo America, that it doesn't matter whether or not America can do it. It's whether or not America is going to try and maintain its hegemony in the midst of these difficulties. So to me, you're doing well abroad to some relative extent. If I were a USG apparatchik, I'd say that, things could be better. But at home is where the question happens. And Americans, I think, we're uniquely isolated from how the rest of the world is doing. I mean, we get a cough, but the rest of the world gets the flu, and we manage to pull out okay. And that, to me, seems to be the ongoing strategy of this regime, is just be the least sick man in the hospice. Is that, if we're okay and we can walk around and everyone else is bedridden, then the USG will do fine. This is how you get guys like Peter Zeihan in their books like The End of the World is Just Beginning, where they're like, everything is going to hell in a handbasket, but don't worry, we can import infinity migrants and America will be okay. And it's like, Peter, come on. And then you see Peter Zeihan's name, and I think of that Twitter account where it's like, here's what you'd look like if you were black and Chinese. And I feel like he'd be really disappointed. Like, this guy isn't black or Chinese. He just has the name for it. And America's just in this position where, domestically speaking, everything that even slightly cognizant, mentally functioning liberals from like 20 years ago who saw the writing on the wall. Like, there's this good book by Philip Caforo, I think he wrote it in 2012, called How Many is Too Many? The Progressive Case for Reducing Immigration to the United States. And all of his argumentation was basically around low social participation, a crisis of national identity, more inter-minority crime, and a huge climate problem with respects to agriculture as well as our trade across the southern border. And all those things got ignored because it was considered too right-wing by a lot of his critics who were on the left. But so now all those things are coming home to roost, and you have a regime that feels with a lot of hubris that it can just do whatever it wants domestically. And to some extent it has, but everything that we've seen in the last week with respects to the U.S. border may say otherwise. Who knows? But I guess that's what's happening is that you have people constantly trying to put out one fire over the other, and there is a senile old man sitting on the Oval Office desk with flames around him, licking his ice cream, saying, "This is fine."
That paints the picture well.
Yeah.
One of the things we've talked about here a decent amount is an analysis of the different generations and the way the each generation kind of seems to have a personality. And there's a really clear starting point with the birth of the boomer generation. Because really the boomers came into a world that was fundamentally different than it had been before. And their coming of age corresponded with massive increase in American prosperity, often at the expense of either the future or the rest of the people around the globe, with spikes in technology. So they were born into a world where all the promises of liberalism seemed to be, like, all the liberal dogmas seemed to be being borne out in real time. So they really have like a psychological posture that I've been referring to as like naive boomer idealism. And it's kind of like the mentality that has ruled us for generations now. But at the same time, they came up through these institutions, a lot of these institutions that were, as Eric Weinstein likes to call them, they're embedded growth obligations, that the institution by its own nature has to keep growing infinitely. But then for a variety of reasons, they've managed to cement themselves at the top of all these institutions and then just gotten older and older and older without ever allowing for any type of circulation of power. So then the Gen X and Millennial generations have been backing up behind them. But now it seems like as everything is kind of starting to break and come apart, it seems to be corresponding with a generational transition where the boomers are beginning to die off. Within, I think, 7 or 8 years, the youngest boomers will all be retirement eligible, and mortality rates are dropping. So the average death age is dropping. So we're going to see a pretty big transition here where the boomer psychology itself is going to lose a lot of representatives. And the Gen X and Zoomer generations seem to have a lot in common in the way they see the world. They're much more they're naturally suspicious of institutions, and they kind of have the punk punk aesthetic with them. How much do you have you been looking at this? How much do you think this bears I don't know, watching and tracking over the next decade or so as we see the boomers start dying off?
I don't know how much of our boomer hate might just be that inherited millennial disposition towards authority, because so much of the social change that the boomers became of age of and were socially affected by, whether that be the hippies, the new left, social rights or social progress with respects to civil rights movements and etc. A lot of that did come from silent generation or even older managerial classes and the judiciary, and they inherited a world very similar to us of radical transformation of the old order, and to do so. So I mean, I don't. It's not that I don't have that like knee jerk, like, man, those boomers, I'm going to get them one day. Like the day of the pillow comes for you. But also, I know that a lot of the people who are to blame and are responsible are long since dead. And like us, they are our children of the ashes. Now, the thing that you can definitely fault them for would be the idea that their level of prosperity was going to last forever. That whole infinite growth thing is definitely a problem. And you can see that writing on the wall for even people like Mark Andreessen's techno-optimist manifesto. Like there is this like underlying, I don't want to call it boomer, but it does have this like optimistic like 80s American mentality of like we're all 30 somethings, you know, for like that old TV show where we're all gonna like make it and we're all gonna retire, we're all gonna have technology escape us. It has that optimism in Rush's song, like the New World Man, but they try and just ignore all the parts that we have, the hubris, the poison, the youthful arrogance to just throw the world away. And to a large extent, we have thrown the world away for the future because there has been no effective resistance over the course of the last 60 to 70 years over these changes. I was recently, my YouTube algorithm's kind of been screwed over because I've been listening to a lot of old Norm Macdonald bits. And so my YouTube algorithm is just showing me old Tonight Show clips with Johnny Carson. And he interviewed Ronald Reagan back in 1976. And the things that Ronald Reagan in 1976, as he was trying to challenge President Ford, were over things like the size of the bureaucracy of government, because they would be an intransigent voter bloc that would always vote for like the side of government, the side of Democrats, and national defense, as well as making sure that we don't surrender our capabilities to produce at home in terms of manufacturing. And it was like this really like weird black pilling moment where you're like, oh man, we've been talking about the same problems since 1976 from like mainstream Republican politicians, and we haven't gotten anything done. To some extent we have, right? But it certainly does illustrate that this has been an intergenerational problem. And I think you guys have talked about generations a lot, you two especially, and I think that you guys have come to a very similar observation where a lot of younger millennial Zoomer conservatives will be talking about things like from Pat Buchanan, or they'll talk about Richard Nixon, and they're talking about people that they have no historical memory or connection to, and they're like, well, we can do what they did, and we can reinvigorate and do all that we can. And it's just like, yeah, but we're how many years too late? Or like the story is completely different. It's the same way that the National Review is like, I want someone to win an election like Ronald Reagan. And it's just like, well, I don't think the National Review is ever going to say race is real. So good luck with that like argument with voter demographics. But okay. And so it just becomes this disaster where there's also no sort of cohesion of peoples. And this is something that the boomers do have some blame for, because there is no sort of respect for their progeny. Like they don't seem to have this value for their posterity, which it blows my mind, because like my parents are Gen X, and I can ask them like what their world was like growing up, and I can even talk to my grandmother, who's technically silent generation, and ask her about what her world was like. And they do care about the future, and they do care about their kids, and they're very worried about where the world is going. And that is something you don't see a lot on the professional level. This is something that I have a debate friend of mine from college, and he works at Raytheon now, and he's like, he's in his early 30s, and he's like a manager where he's at a junior level manager, but he's just like, the average age of everyone I work with is late 50s, early 60s. There's no one passing this technical data around. Like, I don't know how we're going to stay afloat or innovate years from now. And now we're inheriting this great debt, as TK says in chat, not just of like financial debt, but I mean like a cultural debt where there's nothing to pass along except manufactured narratives of leftist historiography. We have no technical information that we can pass around. I mean, this is why Battle Beagle is so depressing to follow on Twitter, because they'll like share articles like, we can't like update the Minuteman III missile anymore. And you're like, oh no, that's like a national deterrent for nuclear weapons, and we can't do that. And you get really upset realizing that we were once an empire. You know, it's like the whole Morlocks and Aloy thing from the Time Machine. Like, we were once an empire of Morlocks who could create all sorts of things and innovate and maintain the world. And now it's a bunch of spiritual Eloy that don't know how to maintain anything and are all fumbling in the dark, demanding that these boomers and these older people fix things. And they realize that, oh, they're all dead. What do we do now?
Important question number: flat Earth or globe Earth?
I like trapezoid Earth.
Ooh.
Okay. I prefer the dodecahedron.
Another hand touches the beacon.
yeah. Worst quest
So-
in any game ever.
So there's
that
been
go
a
ahead.
unique phenomenon that we've been sort of tracking lately along these lines. So like recognizing the like if there's anything that the Zoomer generation and large parts of the Millennial generation, if there's anything that they are getting really jaded or cynical about, it is this sort of naive boomer idealism mindset, the kind of the default perspective of the liberal regime. And the belief in all of the institutions and structures. There's a desperation among the latter half of the millennials and the Zoomers, where some of them are like they're desperate to try to make the thing work. They want to get together and organize and sort of try to like prod the regime into doing the things that they want. But even, I mean, I have sort of a double life myself, where I have a sports Twitter account where I follow sports stuff. And I've kept those lives completely separate from each other. So I'm inundated with, I came from the West Coast, so I'm inundated with all the shit libs. Like they're all, Seattle, LA, Bay Area, Portland, all of those people. I'm surrounded by them. And they are also, like, on one hand, we sit here and we're like, well, these are the people who are, their ideology is the thing governing the regime. And yet they don't feel represented by it at all. They're totally jaded and checked out of the system. They still kind of want to go through the motions of maybe an election, but it's starting to become really performative. They're very upset about the Biden administration. They don't, for different reasons, but they see it as weak and corrupt and incompetent in the same way that we do. So like, is there as this begins happening, it seems like political will is draining from being able to support this type of system, this type of regime. And we're increasingly getting to the point where even if there was some sort of a big false flag attack or something like that, I don't see that being like a rallying point for the regime. If anything, it's just going to highlight just how much the competency crisis has really started to get into the White House and the different federal bureaucracies in it and everything. I mean, I was thinking yesterday, who was it? Someone tweeted that because the Biden administration had told Governor Abbott that he had until today to give the feds access to the border or else, essentially. And someone pointed out, they said this is nonsense, because the like what the Supreme Court ruled on was this extremely narrow thing. They were just saying the feds have the right to cut. It's not wrong if the feds cut the border, the wire at the border. It's not wrong if they do that. That's basically all the Supreme Court said. They didn't get into any more complex reasoning or whatever. And so there's no power behind that kind of a threat. And the question I have is, what are the odds that the key decision makers within the Biden White House are actually aware of this type of legal nuance? Have we gotten to the point where the people who are running the show, who are making these decisions, genuinely don't grok the difference between what the Supreme Court actually said and what everyone kind of assumes that the Supreme Court said?
I think that it has a lot to do with the media aspect of it too, because a lot of people are thinking that a case was heard before the court, like there were oral arguments that we can listen to. No, it was just a ruling on an injunction that they had waived from a lower court. which allows them, as I think it was Aristophanes' Revenge who had tweeted it out, saying like, this is a uniquely very narrow
Yes,
ruling.
that's who it was.
And there's no way that this just applies that the feds can. It was just about the Constantino wires, just about the razor wire that they can put it down. It has nothing to do with anything else. And so far, I think the deadline was like 1 p.m. Eastern, so it's already passed us. And so far, the only thing I've seen happen today was Biden doing something about pausing liquid natural gas, which one really screws over Germany, but two also screws over Texas because that's a big part of the economy as well. So Texas is allowed to put up the wire, and the feds were allowed to remove it. I mean, that was more or less what it came down to. And of course, since we've seen for the last 3 years, I think Abbott's statement made it clear it was like over 6 million people have been allowed into the country illegally with catch and release. I mean, how does that not meet any basic definition where a majority of these people are military-aged men? But the problem is that there's a big difference between old school style politicos who have been in the system for decades versus what seems to be people who just take U.S. hegemony for granted.
Yeah.
It's there. We no longer have statesmen like Henry Kissinger, Robert Conquest, or George Kennan around. You have people like, oh gosh, what's that devil's name? Her name escapes me off the top of my head. But anyways, the one who's really big responsible for a lot of the Ukraine policy that we have in the area that Colonel McGregor likes to crap on. Yeah, Victoria Nuland. Yeah, Victoria Nuland. And we have just appears to be just brain dead people at the helm, both literally and figuratively. And that's the scary thing is that there's no room for nuance anymore in this country. And I mean, that's because of partisan divides, but also because it's explicitly designed that way. For all the purpose of a system is what it does discourse. You know, the purpose of the system for the media establishment is to make things as dumb as down as possible and as black as white. There is no room for gray. So even if you wanted to right the ship, you're still going to have half the country, more or less, hate anything you do, even if you were to get into the weeds and the nuance of the policy and be like, actually, that makes a lot of sense, because there's no room for that anymore. And so I think people just genuinely believe that this is like the setup for like Alex Garland's movie that's going to come out later this year, and not that there are clear constitutional challenges to what's happening. And I think all the other governors of the Republican Governors Association are taking a big sigh of relief, because they're like, oh, thank God Greg Abbott didn't have to cuck on anything. And oh, thank God Biden decided not to like do what we did during integration in the 50s and 60s. So far it's all worked out, but there are plenty of lawfare and, you know, procedural manipulation of bureaucracy or taxes or the IRS or the Department of Energy that, you know, if Biden's administration really wanted to, these executive heads of these departments could really make anyone's life worse. And I don't think we've seen the end of that at all. If anything, just the beginning.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of like, we get in our little circles on Twitter, and we just naturally, because the human brain is only capable of tracking like so many different perspectives and so many different people's faces, we start kind of just lumping people into broad categories. And I think one of the categories that we've kind of lost sight of is sort of the average ordinary person who isn't a rabid liberal ideologue, but who also isn't like necessarily one of our guys. They're just sort of an ordinary, decent person who wants to see competent government, and, you know, they're moderately educated, and like there's a profound number of people out there who are like that, and they don't want to, if you come at them with the, you know, the neo-reactionary, like, you know, the Constitution is void, throw it out, we need, you know, private monarchy, like that sort of thing, they're gonna be like, whoa, bro, like chill out, this is, you know, things aren't that bad. But they're not necessarily going to be a rabid lib. Like, you know, it's not like you're going to beat them and you're going to get a Skittles person coming at you out of them. And what I was thinking is like the competency crisis is really becoming a big deal, to the point where you're seeing moves like this being made by the Biden administration. This is just straight up just an own goal. Like, even if you were trying to be an accelerationist or something within the regime from a leftist or communist perspective, like this is a completely hackneyed, bumbling, awkward, doofy way to go about it. They've just made themselves look. All they've done is they've stirred up sentiment against themselves while rallying very little sentiment toward themselves. It's just the same people continuing to support everything they do because they're going to support everything they do. But there's a growing number of people who are starting to just lose faith in the regime itself. They're not ideologically ready to jump on board with some kind of radical accelerationist take, but they just want stability. They just want comfort. They want things to work the way they're supposed to work. And I think this is part of the reason why, like, on one hand, you see Trump is pretty clearly doesn't have the same energy that he used to. He isn't rallying people the same way that he did in 2016. But his support is almost as high, or maybe even higher than it was then, simply because the number of people who are like, I just want to see an adult. I just want to see competency. And he seems more competent than them, so whatever. What do you think? Have you followed Vivek Ramaswamy in his rhetoric and the way he's been sort of shoehorning his way into this campaign? Do you have any thoughts or preconceptions about that?
I really liked your talk that you guys had actually on that question, like who's running Trump or who's managing him, because Trump doesn't let him speak for more than 60 seconds. And one, that's an ego thing, right? Because Vivek is a good showman. What for all the sort of currying favor and pandering that he does, like Vivek is a very good showman, despite the fact that he'll say whatever he needs to say to come out of his mouth. Because it was funny he did that. Who was it? Like Anomaly. He did that interview with the Nuance Bro guy. And, he was trying really hard for like the 25, 30 minutes he had him to like peg him to what he said in that book he wrote, Woke Inc. or whatever. And like Woke Inc. Vivek Ramaswamy is moderate center, like left compared to Vivek destroy the FBI and the administrative state Ramaswamy.
Yeah.
And so clearly, like all politicians, right? They lie, trust not in princes and the sons of men. There is no salvation. And I have to tell myself that every day when I look at political Twitter. I'm like, none of these people will save you. But, some of these people are not as bad as the other. And so I think for Vivek, he's just a good showman. And I think that, and I've said this elsewhere, that what his issue is the same thing that we've seen other commentators point out, is that there's this weird ethnic battle for the future for the Republican Party. Because, he called out on one of the debate stages for Ronna McDaniel to resign as the head of the GOP chair for the RNC. And this isn't the first battle she had. She had that battle against Kamit Dillon, another woman with subcontinental background. And, of course, this is for the push for more Hispanic voters in the area. So you have the Mayra Flores woman close in the Rio Grande Valley who, yes, the RGV swung for Trump in 2020, but like, a lot of people think she's sufficiently weak on immigration due to ethno-narcissistic reasoning. And so you're watching this battle between sort of, well, how do we win like the Hispanic vote, which has been this like Republican pipe dream for decades, versus this up and coming disaffected with the system, in the same way that a lot of Jewish conservatives get really upset over affirmative action and racial quotas because they don't want to be counted as white and they want to not be hurt by that system that they benefit from as it is, or the status quo. And so the GOP is an institution itself, besides being beautiful losers and sometimes just ugly losers. They are now having this weird battle where like everyone is fighting for a new manager of this party helm, while explicitly just not caring about the issues that affect the majority of the voter base, which happens to be white evangelical flyover state Americans.
Did you see the interview that he did just recently with Andrew Schultz?
I did not. I saw you tweet about it where he referenced James Burnham. So I mean that's a good thing, I guess. I've cheekily called him to some extent H1B Moldbug because he likes to reference the managerial state and trying to destroy it a lot. So I think he's just sort of like another disaffected Silicon Valley guy, which, I mean, so be it, right? Like that is a powerful political faction. I mean, there are some people that melted down and lost their entire like Twitter credibility over assuming people took Teal money. So I mean, it's a valid concern, and I think that it's good that people are waking up to this. But it's always like, I think for people who are on the outside, like you and I, like we have that intrinsic skepticism when like, hey, this like really wealthy guy with like shadowy ties to other people are saying the same things we are. And that raises two red flags in my brain. One, are we actually really being successful in the things that we do discursively? And then two, are the things I've been talking about discursively nothing more than like a planted idea or an op that I fell for or something like that? Because you want to be authentic and original and try and figure things out for yourselves and explore these ideas, but then you get really concerned, like, have I been propagating someone else's campaign or doing that, unrestricted warfare stuff that the Chinese were talking about in the 1990s? Like, some people will be combatants in conflicts that they don't even know they're actual combatants of. And I feel like in America, we're already in that place because we are the most psyoped country on earth, and we're all trying to sift through the consequences of that.
Mm. Yeah, the way that I've been, I guess, kind of thinking about and approaching this is, I mean, 3 years ago, less than 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, the idea that that you would have an extremely charismatic, well-connected billionaire who is basically like issuing NRX dogma from national level stages and going around and talking people and essentially conveying them our worldview. I would have thought like there's like no possible way. I could see this happening in 10 to 20 years, but like right now having that happen. And so I've been going back and forth with myself. Is this, like you say, is this am I getting pulled into a psyop here? Or is this actually something significant? I mean, we should expect that the regime, I mean, we're at the time, everybody says we're at the time when regimes collapse. We're at the time when historically, throughout all of history, by the time you get to this point, you have these sorts of major issues going on. I mean, you've got people who are openly like Civil War LARPing. They're openly talking about it. It's not even being suppressed. It's not being beaten back. It's openly. So like even the happening doesn't have to happen for there to be a happening, like a significant shift in people's psychology. And this would be the time that presumably, given the circulation of elites and the things that Pareto talked about, that eventually you would begin seeing a rising counter elite. The question, there's two separate questions there. Are these counter elites good guys? Are they our guys? That would be one thing to debate. The other thing would be just, could these guys be our allies? Like I don't necessarily care what's going on in their head. I care what they're doing. And if they're doing things that will promote my interests for me or that provide me a platform or facilitate my interests in some way that I can proactively take advantage of, then whether or not he's actually my friend, whether or not he actually truly believes everything he's saying, whatever, I don't really care that much. I want to be able to put myself in a position where I can influence him and actually make him like maybe he's throwing stuff out and he's like, I want to see how this sticks. And if it sticks and people really rally around it, okay, great. Perfect. Now you have a vehicle. Now you have a vehicle that you can use to affect some sort of change. The thing that has driven me crazy, you've probably heard me talk about this, is the naysayers, the immediate, the nothing's going to happen, bro, the doomsaying, I don't see what the practical utility of that is. What's the usefulness in being the guy who goes out and says nothing's going to happen? I think that you guys talked about this with you and Dimes. We're kind of talking about how do you port the digital space and the digital communities and the stuff we're doing digitally? How do you port this into meat space? How do you connect these sorts of things? And I think that ties in here. Like if you're just theory selling online and you're saying things that don't have an end, they don't have a call to action, they don't have a praxis or a telos or whatever, then what are you doing? What's being produced here? I know, Cooper, you had some thoughts about tribalism, and this kind of ties in with tribalism. So go for it.
Man, this episode is pure protein. Well, I guess I'll go on a quick side quest that's related, so I'll bring it back around. But earlier today, I was listening to an old conversation. I don't know how old, but I don't know when all this happened. I'm not very online. I just kind of...
That's good for you.
I get my updates. I get my updates from Matt. And occasionally lurk on Twitter, but Zeter. It was Orrin McIntyre and Alex Cushetta talking about Sam Harris back when he was all about I don't care if there's dead babies and whatever on Hunter Biden's laptop. I wouldn't care, something like that. And anyway, they're lambasting Sam Harris, which they should. However, I did think it was kind of interesting that Sam Harris was kind of right insofar as, a couple years ago, screeching about Trump being an existential threat. In a way, he kind of was, at least to that sort of liberal world order that Sam Harris occupies, because Trump, that movement, that energy, MAGA, has kind of paved the way and tilled the field such that ideas that come out of our circles are starting to hit the mainstream. And kind of related to that, to jump into another idea, and maybe we can tie all this into a further discussion on tribalism, because you and Dimes in that episode the other day had some interesting things to say about this. But backing up a second, I was listening to that episode, and maybe about halfway or 2/3 of the way through the episode, I kind of had a thought, like, man, because you guys were talking, you were using all the names that are kind of exist in our sphere, like Aristophanes and Bap and Nick Land, and you're talking about, and you're using all the jargon, and I was like,
It's a tragedy.
if any, well, that's the thing, is like, if any shitlib were listening to this conversation, or even like fucking my BoomerCon parents, whatever, they would have no idea what's going on.
Well, that's
Like,
that's why
it's almost like we speak an entirely different language.
But we do, and to a point where
That's right.
this, Bap likes to make the joke about, like, you go to wine bar and have tasteful banter with GF, you are gay. No, you speak in like esoteric right-wing Twitter talking points. You're basically speaking right-wing Polari on the internet. So, like, functionally, you are a homosexual on the internet. But
right.
which is terrifying. Well, this is why you need, like, the boomer whisperer, right? This is why, like, the Orrin McIntyres of the world are so bloody important, because you need people who can actually explain these things that your boomer
and
parents can
Vivek,
understand.
to some degree, what do you think about that sort of development, where he's taking sort of talking points, like he's got all these sort of maybe they're just dog whistles to us, but it seems that he's able to communicate them in a way that's palatable to the unwashed masses. What do you think of this development?
Maybe it's because I still like the idea of formalism, and I should let that, like, rot and wither away. I just wish that he'd be a little more honest about who he is. Like, I would have loved it at any point in time during the debate stage, and I'm very upset that no one had the balls to do it. When he does the whole thing, like, listen, we're all Americans. There are two genders. God is real. I wish someone asked Vivek which God he believes in. Like, come on, come on. It's the Elephant Man, isn't it? Like, come on, baby. Like, come on. You can tell me that. Like, you were part of a Jewish fraternity and you're a devout Hindu. Like, it's okay. But we get it. You have to court, like, white evangelicals, and they didn't buy into your shtick either. So, I mean, I'm glad that they've got that census still on them. But I think that the point you make, that we are speaking in jargon, we're speaking in technical terms. Like, yeah, you want whisperers. And to go back to the point that even Matt was talking about, is that maybe you don't care what they are. And I feel like that was a big debate between, say, Yarvin's Dark Elves nonsense stuff, right? Because he is right. The elite tastes of the world are probably not going to match mine. But historically speaking, when you do have changes in belief, it is the elites that change first. And this is why when, like, Mosca and Pareto talk about it, they're cribbing from Marx, because they're crypto-Marxists to some extent, because even Marx talks about this, that there will come a point in time of the proletariat rising up, that some of the bourgeoisie will side with us and bring about the workers' paradise. And to some extent, that just kind of all makes us Marxists secretly. To some extent, we just don't want to admit it, right? We're all temporarily embarrassed, like Marxist revolutionaries. We just want things to be a little more trad and a little more right-wing, maybe, than we do this fake and gay world that we live in. And with that mindset, or even adopting that kind of maybe just presupposition of the world, that we do need elites to change. And I mean, historically speaking, I mean, this is how it worked with Christianity. Christianity, rose in the cities first. It took care of the more populated areas first. And this is where, I mean, like, the word pagan itself, it has more of a, oh, you're an outsider. You're not from the city. You're more from, like, the more pagan, non-Christian countryside. And so that problem, I think, exists very clearly within our own sphere and frame. That leads us to be very distrustful of people that we can't for sure suss out as our guys. And again, I'm very skeptical that I'm not going to get someone riding in on a white horse that's going to pick up the crown from the mud and say, "I am the new dictator of America," or so on and so forth. But I mean, if he comes, cool. I just hope he doesn't.
Well, okay.
If he doesn't come, if he doesn't come for me and my belief system, and he lets me have a tangibly better way of life, I'm all for that. I just don't have. I don't think we've seen anyone that commands that level of respect yet, or not. I mean, Trump speaks to like the American id, right? Like he just speaks to the knee jerk subconscious of the United States, where like
Yeah.
this is how things are going to be. Like, when Trump says we're going to bomb the shit out of him, like people like that. And I mean, like when he tweeted out like the lowest pixelated image, with the crappy compression of the American flag when they assassinated, they killed Giuliani. Oh boy, right? Like it was a good time. And you want those things and you like those things because that sort of speaks to the American culture of what we have. And so whoever is going to succeed and pick up these things, they are going to need they're going to need this jargon, because we're speaking about things that have been talked about for over a century. We've looked back on the histories of social changes, revolutions, politics, both European and American. Whoever does it, though, has to package it in a way that gets people on board with the idea of America. And I unironically, and this might be spicy, I don't know, but I think if the GOP wants to succeed, it probably wants to do that quote unquote multiracial whiteness thing, where like the things that you want to do improve the majority of the population of America, but also it lifts everyone else up too. Because I mean, you look at the Rio Grande Valley exit polling from 2020, and it was things like immigration and the economy, like the two bread and butter issues that Trump ran on in 2016, as well as for re-election in 2020. Whoever is managing Trump right now, whether it's the Project 2025 guys or it's the even people like Vivek, like they kind of have I think a much better instinct to know what time it is. And that gives me hope. If Trump gets reelected, cool. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, highly skeptical for the rest of his term and whatever happens. But there is sort of this crown in the gutter, I think, for the United States. It doesn't mean I need a king. I just need someone that's actually going to fix things. And this is where I think Yarvin is wrong about FDR, because Yarvin did have people like Colonel Robert House and others that were doing a lot of leaning in on him and taking advantage of his physical and mental faculties as well to get things done. And that leaves you a little more concerned about how things are going to go. But you Cooper is right. You need people who can whisper these things to people, but also whoever is going to be quote unquote be on your side, they're probably not going to share your values. But the question for you then, right, and this is the whole thing about digital communities and meet space, is how do you facilitate the survival of your ideas, your beliefs, and your culture in an age where everything wants you to become atomized, deracinated, and be re-territorialized with very gay ideas? America has a unique advantage because we're like ground zero for that. I mean, there was a Pew Research Center poll on religion that came out in 2017, so like 7 years ago, where like white American evangelicals have a stronger resistance to things like homosexuality and gay marriage than the wealthy Muslims that come into the United States. And this is where, as much as I don't like the man, Indian Bronson, he is right when he says to people, like, your kids will probably be trans. The problem is that like my kids won't be trans, but like the Indian or the Muslim that comes in here on an H1B visa or tries to like get a role at like the Department of Health and Human Services, their kids are going to be trans and they're going to be pro-trans and they'll try and trans my kid. And that is unacceptable. So things like no immigration, a moratorium, remigration, getting all this stuff out of here in power is much better than what we have now. And so I'm emphatically for burning the system to the ground. That's why I voted for Trump in 2020. I was like, he's a bull in the china shop. That's great. And now I'm supportive of him in part because it seems like whoever's behind him, Project 2025, these Claremonters that have some ideas, they may not be 100% with me, but they are closer to my values than so far anyone else I've seen. And I apologize for ranting so long.
Yeah, dude, come on. I wanted to I don't actually think I disagree with you, but just to play devil's advocate, to push back on something you said like an hour ago at the beginning of that rant.
You're welcome.
Do
This is
you
fun.
think? And I'm not okay. I'm not nearly as much of a fanboy about Vivek as Matt is. He's kind of like God Emperor Vivek over there, and I don't really care about the guy.
And this is
Um,
how you treat the 6th house and the tribe unmourned?
Yeah. Do you think that you, or maybe we, over in this side of Twitter, kind of in like, okay, we go down the checklist. Like, we'll take someone like Vivek as an example. You know, he's a Pajit and he's a pagan and he's this and this and that. And he doesn't check off all the boxes that represent me personally. Do you think this is just kind of an expression of our inner shit lib that's still kind of in there, where it's like, oh, this guy doesn't represent me, therefore he's not my guy? And you know, coming from these circles, you'd think that we would understand whoever the guy is, maybe not our guy, whoever the guy is, you know, Red Caesar, whatever you want to call him. If he's gonna rule, he's gonna rule, and you just hope that he makes your life better. But like, this isn't democracy. He doesn't represent you. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, like, are you just gonna suck it up and accept the fact he's doing some good for you? Don't nitpick over things, like don't purity spiral.
Right. Like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Absolutely, I think there's validity to that claim.
Like, if I can own a house, you know, if someone can make it possible that I can own a house in my lifetime, I'm gonna be pretty happy. You know, and I kind of don't care if he, you know, he's got
right. No. I
his
100%,
elephant god or whatever.
I 100%
Demon.
Understand where you're coming from, right? Like I do. And then you don't want a purity spiral. This is why, like, for instance, a few months ago, or probably more than a few months ago now, I had Jeremy Carl come on. He worked in the Trump administration in the Interior Department. He is, you know, he and I disagree on some things, but you want people like competent men who have executive experience and know how to get shit done. That, oh, he's like a boomer that like agrees that like, oh, Ronald Reagan did some good things. And like, I had someone in my Twitter replies with an anime profile picture, and that's always like 50-50, that like they're super based, or it can be like there's who knows what's underneath that.
I just write them off immediately.
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but you know,
no anime allowed in the real King Pill.
I'm inclined to agree. However, he was just like, oh, this guy's a, you know, freaking moron for thinking that like Reagan did something good. He's like a piece of shit president, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, do you really want to be pissing off the guy that knows what it's like to work in a Republican White House? Like, what are you doing? Yeah, Cooper, I do agree with you that we shouldn't purity spiral and piss off everybody. But on one hand, like I think there's the
I see the value of gatekeeping. I
see the value of gatekeeping, but also I see the value of understanding that some people may come from the outside that have the right perspective that can help you. But I don't want, and it is maybe that personal like libtard in me that needs to die, right? Like just kill the, like, you know, let the cringe die inside of you. But you also know that they're deeply held personal convictions.
Bury it under liquor.
Well, their deeply held personal convictions will be expressed in their policy. Like Trump, for all intents and purposes, is a New York libtard. But you know what? A New York libtard from like 30 years ago is considered a fascist by today's standards. So like, yes, sir, I will vote for Rudy Giuliani. Like, yes, Mr. President, whatever you say, we're going to go bomb Soleimani, right? Like, okay. But like when I see someone like Vivek or I see something like that happening, I just know that there's two different cultures there. There's two different belief systems. There's two different there. And so, yeah, Vivek can do some good things, sure. But on one hand, I'm like, that guy is not me, and I don't think he represents Middle America or whatever. So maybe keep him on a tight leash, you know?
Yeah.
One thing we've talked about before is that Christianity has thrived under pagan emperors in pagan societies for a long time. They've thrived peacefully and been on good terms with the empire, and it's like being ruled by pagans is not necessarily. It's not like I'm saying you should actively work to be ruled by pagans if there were alternatives. But I mean, I would say functionally, I would take a pagan who talks like Vivek.
We are pagan,
over a
basically.
Christian, over a Christian who talks like Obama. You know,
Christian.
Yeah. You mentioned formalism, and one of the things. So like he mentioned, I'm a big Vivek stan.
Yeah, like
I'm just
I
kind
would
of
love
having
it
to
if
lean into
Vivek
it.
were to like take like some oath of office, or just like he's going to be like the chief of staff for Trump, and he just like gave a little like speech in front of like the press White House press secretary stand or whatever, and he was like, "Listen, I believe in some elephant god, but by that elephant god as my witness, I'm going to destroy the administrative state, and I'm going to make life better for you."
Yeah, he
I
could
would be
bring
like,
his
yeah,
idol
yeah, yes,
to
sir,
the
Mr.
White House
Ramas,
and,
yes, sir, Mr. Ramaswamy. Like, let's do this. We're gonna make it happen. I don't know. I just wish we had some like. This
Can
is
we
why
buy
I
you
love
some
it.
incense?
This is why I
Yeah.
love it when liberals are so like mask off, because I'm like, finally, some refreshing conversation, and I don't have to speak in code. It's like that copy pasta or whatever. It's like, I see through your dog whistles, and I'm like, I'm literally um, I'm literally so and so. It's like, it's like, wow, you're really saying it on the timeline. It's like, I'm openly like, it's like, it could be anything from a fascist to a communist. It's like, I see through your dog whistles. And it's just like, I just like mask off open conversation. Like, I want, the administrative state to be like totally destroyed. I think that a lot of people who are in this country shouldn't be here to begin with, and that America could be a fundamentally better place if we had actual strong executive power that was being used for the benefit of the country. And if we're going to have an empire, run it like an effective empire and not this fake and gay anti-colonialist. We're going to put a rainbow flag in every country. Like, we're better than that. We don't have to be. Instead, what we have is like very milquetoast, homosexual, moral, therapeutic deism
Yeah.
that has basically enabled the worst of our society to just run rampant over it. And it's bad for America, and it's bad for the rest of the world. So, I mean, I'm not a total opposition to people like Vivek or Yarvin. They serve very good purpose, and they serve as good jumping off points for ideas. The question, as Cooper was referring to, was how do you translate that well into the meat space? And I think that requires boomer whisperers, and that also requires you, in the same way that it requires us Christians to actually walk the walk rather than just do whatever what we say online. Like, everyone LARPs to some extent. The question becomes how much of that LARP is just online and not the live action, role play stuff. And so you have to do the live action part too, I guess. And for some people, that means the whole basket weaving idea where you meet in person, you form friendships and things like that. The old Glory Club has their chapter formation where guys just get together and they do sporting events. They treat themselves like a fraternity. It's explicitly non-political. You have, of course, the exit group and so on. I mean, Kevin did a great job organizing the NATO conference. Like, that was huge. That's a very important subject matter here, I think. And so it's about translating the ideas and putting them to practice, right? This is the old, again, the reason why I think we're all secretly crypto Marxists. It's like, well, how do we put the theory into praxis? And here we are.
Right? Yeah. The thing that I've been
Mail pipe bombs to industrialists.
For legal
Thank you,
reasons,
Cooper.
I have to disavow.
Yeah. Right. We don't know that guy. He just shows up here
Yeah,
sometimes.
he just hijacked the
I'm
stream
looking
like it's
awfully green. What's going on?
Well, yeah, you're an
That's
eco
probably the
terrorist,
green light.
apparently.
I know, but I look extra green tonight. I'm
Very
glowing.
fitting for a frog.
So the kind of operating premise that I'm going with here is, until I see stuff that says otherwise to me, is after. So someone exposed me to the term PayPal Mafia, which I'd never actually realized it was actually, like, it actually has its own Wikipedia page, and I was looking at this trend I was kind of starting to notice as we were doing the generational analysis thing. I was like, it's interesting that there's a lot of personalities that I would call Gen X in both in their age and in more of their outlook, the way that they seem to relate to the world. The Joe Rogan, Tucker, Elon. There's a number of them. Alex Jones. These are all much more Gen X oriented in the way that they kind of borrow from this Gen X spirit. And as I realized, okay, well, I'm guessing over the next 10 to 20 years or so, we're going to get to the point where the boomers are gone completely. There is no more boomer generation. And what's the society going to look like then when you don't have that boomer influence there? What direction are we going now, so I can start skating to where the puck is going? And this led me down a deep rabbit hole of, I hadn't paid any attention to Vivek at all. I'd called him Republican Andrew Yang and was just like, whatever. And then I decided one day, someone was telling me I should check him out more, and I was like, all right, whatever. So I decided to start listening to his long form stuff, and I realized that I'd only been listening to his short form, like where he's barnstorming basically, and he does that. He does it very effectively. He boomer whispers very effectively with that, but a lot of it is very cringe to my very seasoned
overly
ears.
online ears.
Right, exactly. But then I started listening to his long form stuff where he's like his conversation with on the Sean Ryan show, his conversations with Jordan Peterson, even his conversations with David Pakman, which was one of the worst things I've ever listened to in my life. And I realized, okay, this guy is not that at the very least, this guy has done extensive reading. He has immersed himself in this worldview comprehensively because he's able to talk about these things off the cuff better than I am, like better than most people I know. He's one of the most insightful with respect to the exact sort of things we're talking about, the nature of the administrative state, where it came from, the principal agent problem, all these things. And he's going at length on this. And I was like, okay, well, first of all, I've never seen a politician that's capable of doing this. A guy who chooses to run for office, and he's also capable of speaking like this.
Well, he is also not a politician, which I think enables him. I know that's the old talking point, but it is the best part about him is that he, like Trump, he's not a politician, and he's a well-read man. I like Vivek. I want to make it clear. I do like the guy. I just don't think he being in the executive role is that I think he would be better as like chief of staff or being someone who can fire a lot of people on the president's wishes or whatever. Because I think Trump has the same problem with Biden, where it's, they're old school in that respect. They kind of don't know what time it is. I thought you saw that very clearly. I thought it was where Tucker was asking Trump, like, they want to put you in prison. They want to kill you. Do you think there's going to be a civil war? Right. And the Gen Xers are asking all these questions. And there's something that Buck Johnson also said in an interview with Jay Burden, where he was just like, there's this Gen X rebellion happening. And I think that it's good because the boomers have been in power for way too long. And so you have this sort of like angsty Gen Xers that want to do things. I think Vivek he's technically a millennial, and I mean, he's going for it. Good on him. And I want him to just do what he says, call the administrative state. And I think it's good that he's with the Trump campaign. And he is smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. And maybe this is the purity spiral. Or I think the worst part about sometimes with Twitter is that Twitter also does that auto decapitation with respects to no nuance, because everyone did the knee-jerk reaction, like the Indian must go, like he must be strapped to a cannon, right? And it's like, well, I don't think you're going to get that. So the question becomes, do you either work with the guy and make him useful for you, or do you not? And I still think in my own worldview that you can make these people useful, and you want people like him disseminating ideas. Because I'm sorry, Vivek is not that much older than any of us on this stream, and I don't think his political career is over after this election cycle. He will be a very powerful fundraiser, talking head, RNC chairman. He's not going away. And I know that some people are single issues on identity or whatever it may be, but they're here to stay, lest the world ends and the second coming happens at any point in time, and then we're all really going to have to deal with the consequences of the words we've said.
How old is he?
I think he's 38. Like, he's,
He's 12 years older than me.
Okay.
We have nothing in common.
Well,
Hey, Mr. Frogman.
The thing with Vivek.
Quick question.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What time do you got to get out of here?
I'm good for another hour. It's all up to you.
All right. Sounds good.
Me too.
So the thing that, as I was watching him and listening to him, it wasn't him so much that really got my attention. It was the fact that, okay, I'm listening to him, and I hear him go at length into discussing all of these things, the stuff he would do in the executive branch to thin the administrative state, going through like line by line of specific niche laws and speaking about historical stuff. And he's very clearly like, I'm sure he's read Yarvin, just the way he talks. And so what stood out to me then was not him per se, the fact that if he does understand the world the way we do approximately, what is he doing running for office? Why is he there? What is he trying to accomplish? because it clearly can't be trying to actually be elected president. And he would recognize, if he's correctly identifying what happened with Trump's presidency, the fact that he got completely kneecapped and just putting a president that wants the right things into office doesn't accomplish it. What's he trying to accomplish? So the only thing I could reason then is he must be aware that there is significant institutional support for what he's talking about. There must already exist people with wealth, power, and influence who are ready to step in and support his agenda, were his agenda to get some sort of power. Because he's not gonna be like, oh, well, we need to go message and we need to spread the message and get people riled up. Like, if he sees the world the way we do, he would recognize that that's bullshit. And so then this connected to me looking at the PayPal Mafia thing and starting to realize just how extensive their roots are into all of the major institutions. And then going and looking at like their likes on Twitter, the individual members of the quote unquote PayPal Mafia, or more broadly, just kind of this tech founder culture, going and actually looking at the things that they're liking and saying, and they're all talking about Vivek, and they're all big China hawks, anti-immigration, and anti-ESG and DEI. These are like major planks for them. And when he created Strive Asset Management in 2022, the three people who invested in it first were Peter Thiel, JD Vance, and Bill Ackman. And so now, okay, Bill Ackman is this guy who's losing his shit on Twitter, taking it to Harvard and Business Insider and all of this. He's like the most generic regime creature type guy if you look at his history. He and his wife are like major donors to Planned Parenthood. And yet here he is firing broadsides at the academy. And I'm seeing all these things happening at once. I'm like, okay, this can't be a coincidence. And then somebody introduced me to Project 2025, and I started reading down their policy proposals, and I was like, I've heard this before. This is word for word what Vivek is talking about.
Yeah.
Vivek is running down every single one of these in the exact same way, talking about them in the exact same way. And in his Sean Ryan interview, he explicitly said that he has a big team of advisors coming from venture capital, organizational management, et cetera, et cetera. And what occurred to me is, if you're a tech founder who lives the world of venture capital and sitting on executive boards, the one thing that you understand more than anything else is executive power. You recognize when there is an absence of executive power, and you know what it looks like, you know what the effects are, and you know how to restore it. And so this is when it clicked with me. This is an actual legitimate counter elite. This is not just some niche little crew of a couple of millionaires or something who are doing their libertarian Bitcoin party or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, these are actual major movers and shakers. And what's their angle? I don't need them to be my guys. But if they want to restore true executive power to the executive branch and abolish the administrative state, well, that's a move in the formalist direction. It may not be as far as I want them to go, but I would much rather have, like, I can attach my interests to theirs. I can't attach my interests to the existing regime. It's just not possible. It's just not even feasible. But if their interests are, let's get rid of all this bloat, let's quit playing these ESG DEI games, let's actually take China seriously, let's restore the borders so we actually have a country because we want to run it like a business, I'm like, if you get halfway there, I will like that better than what we have now. And then I can attach myself to your, like, you know, if you guys are like the hot air balloon taking off, well, I'm just going to clip my carabiner to your hot air balloon so I get pulled up with you. So what is that? How does that have? What do you think of that?
Well, a good friend of mine by the name of Christopher Sandbach said that there is a very uncomfortable battle for the future that is currently being fought that most people don't realize what's happening. And the PayPal Mafia, it's not called that in the California ideology. That's an essay by Richard Barnbrook and Andy Cameron. And it's sort of this critique of what I guess you could call the PayPal Mafia. Just this was written in 95. And it was talking about how these guys are sort of these technological optimists, almost to a point of being determinists, that they're going to, try and usher in more free market stuff. And we need to get rid of like these social controls, DEI, and the rest, because that's an inhibition towards freedom. And so really, I think that this counter elite is just the embodiment of that ideology versus the logical conclusion of just like egalitarian progressive liberalism. And one of these, I think, is better than the other. I think both have their, I mean, one has their problems, and I think you can read that in some of that infinite growth mentality out of like the Andreas and Horowitz bit. But I mean, you even saw that with JP Morgan Chase CEO, Jamie Dimon, saying like, hey, Trump was like mean, but he was right about a lot of things. And that's a clear counter signal that when one of the richest, most influential people on earth is saying, listen, this guy was right, and maybe we shouldn't be so cruel to the people who were there. To me, that does, I think, indicate a lot of what you're saying, that there is a significant elite backing willing to go for things. The question that runs in my head is just how much of this might be a return to something older, like yeah. I just saw that in the chat there. It's kind of funny.
I have such mixed feelings about this because everything he's saying, I like temperament, like my constitution disagrees with, but he just gave us $50.
Well, on one hand,
what are you doing to me, man?
On one hand, I definitely agree with the notion of I don't like. That's the problem with the Republican Party now is that I don't want to. I don't want it, but legally, like if you're gonna give me, you know, infinity H1B Moldbugs, then at least let me, you know, have some remigration policies in place. Because at the end of the day, that's the whole civilization is incommunicable part. Like we see this. We don't clap. This was the whole McLuhan thing. Is that the global village will come, and then once we're all in tight proximity to one another, turns out we all hate each other because we're all so different. And this is you see this in microcosm on Twitter and on other forms of social media. And this is how we can never be exposed to other ideas because we know that the other is bad and they're not us. So we want to get rid of them or we never want to associate with them. And this is why we want to ratio people on Twitter so much, because violence is a form of identity. And because our idea of violence is so gamified and kitschfied that, well, instead of killing each other in the streets like we would have in 1848, we're just going to, you know, settle our differences over a good old video essay or a ratio on Twitter. And and in a lot of ways, our own form of violence is fake and gay, right? And that's I guess some qualifying thesis to Bap's point, but it does illustrate to me that these things like on the super chat do matter. Like they clearly do. Like Phil is right.
Yeah, no, it's the what is the point of any of this? It's that part that I like. It gives me the ick, you know.
It gives you the you are spiritually an e-girl, Cooper. I don't know what to tell you. It gives you the ick. I'm sorry, sir. Return to TikTok. But I don't know. Like this goes back.
What's this TikTok thing the kids are using these days?
You'll find out. You'll get the ick from there too. So I guess like
I've got an only.
I was told this is how I told this guy that he was a coomer and he needs to seek God when he told me like very early on when I set up my like subscribe star and everything. He's like, you know, OnlyFans takes the smallest cut, and I was like, why do you know that? Gooner, a little concerning there, Gooner. You know. You can move the Overton window, and I mean honestly, just to see Kirk and them talk about like the Great Replacement, and to even see Vivek unfortunately cock up the talking point of the Great Replacement. Like, no, people like me and my family should be here. No, not really. Like, no. But like, you're getting there. Or, you know, Renaud Camus' point about the Great Replacement's more accurate, but you know, you're getting there. And so that's the thing is like, as an outsider, you're permanently stuck in this like angry, what is the point if my ideas get accepted because they're going to get co-opted? It's the same thing where people were getting upset, and myself personally to some extent, about the whole Bill Ackman thing. It's like, you've donated to Planned Parenthood, you still donate to all this stuff. You're talking about Dean Phillips, like you want some alternative to Trump, to beat Trump. And it's just like, so at what point are we just not going to get like Norman Potteret's 2.0, where like instead of My Negro Problem in Hours in 1963 Commentary Magazine, it's going to be My Woke Problem in Hours in 2024? And it's just like, how much of this have I already seen before play out? Because there was a change of elites in circulation with the neocons in the 60s and 70s. And just back in the 1960s and 70s, the majority of the population had to now cater to this minority interest group to make the political coalition work. And sure, they benefited from some things, but a lot of the things that screwed over that group in the first place stayed in law and stayed in power. So how much of the problems that we have today will be addressed only for a small portion of it, like DEI or whatever, and not the bigger issues that are still civilizationally challenging the existence of the country and its people?
one of the things you mentioned, you talked about the like instead of having a duel, we do a video essay battle, and this is a thought that had occurred to me. Actually, it's something I'd written down here to try to remind myself to bring up. Is it occurred to me we've in history, you look through the cycles of history, every time that you get like societal instability to the point where we have now, then I mean the guillotines would have been out by now. But for some reason, they haven't been. And I think there's probably a lot of reasons for this. One of them is I mean, like the microplastics in the balls and the lack of testosterone. But to what extent do you think the internet has become, and not just the internet, but social media particularly, and social media in its present form in particular, has become a sort of pressure relief valve for violence, where instead of going out and necessarily participating in violence, we now export a lot of our political violence into social media. Not all of it, but much of it has been exported to social media. And I guess two-part question: to what extent do you think that is the case? And if you do think it is the case, do you think that this is a trend that can continue? Are we entering a new not a new Christian era? It would be a new Christian era, but are we entering a new era of human anthropology, whereby we actually begin exporting our violent tendencies into digital space? And so you can be digitally depersoned, digitally deplatformed, digitally executed, but it doesn't actually touch your person.
Three-part question.
Three-part question.
Then talk about pontificate for a moment about digital deracination, which is a term I heard you use on that stream the other day, and I thought it was brilliant.
Oh, well, sure. We'll start with the three-parter, I guess. Starting off, whichever venture capitalist designs and develops a technology pill or therapy that removes the microplastics out of the testicles of every American man, king of America, right there,
Yes.
number one. Whoever
What if he's brown?
We'll work with it. We'll work with it. I'll take it.
All right.
We'll still improve on the grip strength stuff too. Yeah.
Thank you, Ryan Isaac.
It sounds like Cooper's going to go to a trip to Dime Square pretty soon. But so to get back to the point about violence, I think this is why you see. This is why I stay as far away as humanly possible from like Christian Twitter. And
Yes.
I got some flack for saying that out loud one time, because they're like, why?
The orthodorks?
Well, I stay away from all of it. Period. I just stay away from all forms
Cancer,
of it.
man. Pure cancer.
It is. But why? It might be called cringe. It might be called coal or whatever. But what is all of this personality, intersecular online fighting, other than what McLuhan would say is, violence is a quest for identity? We have displaced in a very discarnate fashion, which is very concerning for people who are so interested in the incarnate word of God, that we have exported a discarnate form of violence and identity away from our physical self into these online battles and spaces where, we're all concerned about, the e-Catholics versus e-Lutherans versus e-Ortho Bros or whatever. And it's like, man, a friend of mine who I believe is a Presbyterian had said that like online Ortho Bros had done more damage than the Turks did to Constantinople, and I thought that was like a super damning indictment of how bad things can be. I think the problem is that the right in general, not just right wingers in general, have this understanding and have for years that the law isn't on your side. Despite the fact that the letter of the law may be on your side, we fundamentally know that. Unlike Antifa, where they can be sponsored by the state, work in cooperation with clergy, and work in cooperation with non-governmental organizations, and have pallets of bricks and U-Haul trucks full of shields and batons deployed at random. If that happened to our side, we would be like drone strike yesterday. It would be real bad. And that's a big concern. And so I think that's one big reason why so much of our escapism for violence is digitized. It is discarnate, because we know that if we were to be like the Proud Boys, march in the street and go like redact an abortion clinic or redact an Antifa headquarters in North Carolina, you would be in trouble very quickly. You'd be hunted down and you would be treated like a J6 guy. And that would be really, no one wants that, right? And that's what we also saw with J6. And this is where Yarvin was like, God doesn't like it when you play pretend. He was right. For a man who doesn't believe in God, he was right about that saying. God doesn't like it when you play pretend, because either you take over the place or the enemy will punish you and arrest you in that respect. And so we're used to we're used to being on like the fringe. We're used to being online. We're aware that anarcho-tyranny works against us. So that's one reason why I think so much of our violence is digitized. And that's also why I think that you see a lot of people get really skeptical when there are quote unquote right-wing groups, because are they feds? Are they not? And that's a big issue, I think, to see there. As for why we do it, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, as McLuhan wrote in Understanding Media, like just games in general, there are these organized social areas of pride that we can engage in. And he said the Anglosphere, especially the United Kingdom and the United States, is really good at that because we have so much organized sporting environments. I think that you can translate that very well to the digital. Like Twitter is nothing more than a clout-based open world PvP server where we're all like, that Will Stancil guy that like Steve Saylor's been arguing with for the last 3 days. That has been like enemy spotted in Counter-Strike, and every right-wing Twitter account has been like going after that guy. Entertaining as all can be, but I also know to some extent in real life that's not going to stop the Biden administration from like dropping off a busload of Guatemalans into like my backyard or whatever. That's a huge concern. And so the digital deracination term, to Cooper's point, is sort of the same sort of idea before this, and I came up with this before I started reading a lot of McLuhan, was the same sort of auto amputation that McLuhan talks about. We can amputate ourselves. We can deracinate ourselves from what's outside of our window. And this is how we end up speaking a language that like most normies, right? Like we even have a word for it, like the normies wouldn't get it, right? And they wouldn't understand that I'm speaking on these, like, I'm actually like based and king-pilled and trad and whatever. And it's like, they're like, sir, what language are you speaking? Like, please take your meds, schizo, right? And that's why you need those whisperers. But the deracination part is that it allows us to become so focused with what's online rather than the immediate issues that face us. And that can be your own physical health and livelihood. It can be your job. It can be your relations to family. It can be your relations to local politics. I print out if I think they're like unpolitical issues, and I take them to my county GOP office because I think that, hey, county GOP chair, you might like this, piece from Warren McIntyre. You might like this piece written by the distributors. You might like this analysis on why we should support X over Y and this election issue. And so I think that needs to happen. You need to find a way to integrate your beliefs into your day-to-day life. And again, that goes back to the whole crypto Marxist point with theory and praxis. But I mean, for us especially, right, like the point would be, how can you translate these ideas in an environment where, politically speaking, you're fighting a very asymmetrical conflict? I did a video on this a few years ago at this point. I don't know how old it is, but it was called the Revisionist and the Hegemon. Like the USG, like this whole liberal globo homo thing, that is the hegemonic state. Right wingers are put in a position where they are the revisionist state, where they wish to change the status quo of things. And that does kind of put you, oddly enough, despite being conservative, despite being traditional or reactionary, that puts you in a revolutionary position. And that's the weird sort of dissonance that we live in. And so that's the dissonance, the deracination part, and that's the way I guess we approach that question. We have outsourced our violence to the digital because we live very discarnately, and we know that if we were to do violence in real life, or even do something smart like what Daniel Penny did by putting a crazy guy in a chokehold, you're going to get arrested and you're going to have the book thrown at you. Like I saw not too long ago, there was this wedding venue that said that we're so sorry that this impromptu wedding happened despite not being booked.
Yeah.
And he took a picture, and the wedding was a black wedding. And I'm like, I already know why you let it go through, because you didn't want to be called racist and like had your storefront burned down by a mob of ethno-narcissists. So
workers of the world unite.
Yeah, basically, except it's just people who can't hear smoke alarms of the world unite. So.
One of given this exporting of violence into the digital and having so much more of the political process happening in the digital, the extent to which this is true, I think would then, how would I describe this? Like if you have an think of like a percent, like a health bar or like an accumulation bar where it's getting up to 100%. And it's like once you get to 100%, that means that's when you get the full completion of the war, the full regime change, a whole new thing comes in. Obviously, it doesn't work that way, but just conceptually, then what that would tell me is that we're much further along in this process than it actually looks like. If we're grading, because we're used to evaluating the progression of political events and the outcomes of wars and that sort of thing, if we're used to grading this on a kinetic events scale, then the lack of legitimate kinetic events doesn't necessarily mean that the war hasn't been progressing. So then it could be like instead of people waiting for the Civil War to begin or the new Civil War or whatever war, it actually has begun already. It's been going for a while, and we've progressed through this process to a point where instead of, I guess there's a major problem that I see within a lot of our online circles and I get sucked into this perpetual doomer, like looking for all of the ways that everything is not going to work. It's figuring out why we're blocked at every front, why our enemies are the most powerful thing in the world, how everything is actually 4D chess by the libs to root us out and to frame us, and where people start getting just kind of like retreating into themselves. Everyone's just kind of sitting around waiting for the happening. And when in reality, I think that this is a time for great optimism. It's not that there's not bad things happening. It's that we have a greater capacity to either change things or change ourselves now than we ever have in the past. We're able to organize and take on projects and affect the narrative and actually have some sort of influence on the trajectory of things in a way that we have never had before. You've got Nassim Taleb's his intolerant minority concept, and every society always moves around the intolerant minority. But we actually have the capacity to be that intolerant minority now. We just have to figure out exactly how to do that. But in order to figure out how to do that, you have to first have a desire to do that. You have to have hope and optimism and a sense of the future existing beyond, the next year or the next election cycle, or, we have the capacity now to build a civilization in a way that people never have before. But in order to do that, we have to first have the desire to do that, which means not subjecting yourself to perpetual demoralization all the time. And we coined a term a few weeks back, the Gunic. And it's a portmanteau between gooners and eunuchs. And what we're directing it at is the types of guys we see who present themselves as, based and trad and conservative and right wing and they're just the right amount of racist or sexist or whatever. And they often have fantastic insights on a lot of things. But when you really get down into the meat of what they're saying, their prescription is ultimately nihilistic. It's basically, you can't do anything. You just need to wait for a great man to arrive. You just need to sit around and wait for other people to solve your problems, or just complain and be resentful that they haven't solved your problems. And resentment is really or I would say it this way: liberalism is resentment corporatized. Liberalism runs on resentment. And I don't mean just liberalism as in I'm speaking philosophically. Liberalism is an ideology of resentment. It's the way that resentful people organize themselves. If we're going to transcend out of that, if we're going to actually build a civilization for our people, we can't wait for someone else to do it for us. I see Vivek. I see him as the tip of a spear of an organized group that are rising up because they're dissatisfied with the existing civilization and they want to create a new one. They want to port to that one, however that's going to happen. And I don't necessarily need their interests to be my interests to capitalize on their momentum, to capitalize on what they're doing. Essentially, instead of using Trump as a wrecking ball, now we can use this entire cabal or whatever as a wrecking ball, to attach ourselves to their interests, use their momentum to carve out our own interests. But it seems like anytime someone tries to suggest a legitimate, the Marxist, the theory versus praxis thing, it's like we're most comfortable theory selling. But as soon as people start suggesting actual practical things people can begin to do to improve their lives, then they're either grifters or feds, or there's like a crabs in the bucket phenomenon.
Oh yeah, the shark
guys.
booming. The
Yes.
shark wooming.
Yeah, they're just happy to hang out in the longhouse and wait for Daddy to get home.
Well, this is why I tell. I had this point of waiting, and I wish I came up with that term "goonic." That was so good because I just would say right wing eunuch because I'm going to use that term now. I'm going to give you guys credit for it. That's such a great
you.
term
Awesome.
because I first thought
So
of
now
that.
a bunch of people on Twitter can just slaughter it. And
Yeah,
they're gonna kill it.
Absolutely, they're going to kill it, but that's okay. Because this is not maybe it's an insult, but I don't mean it to be. Because I read someone said, "Oh, you should read this review of Bronze Age Mindset." It was by an e-girl named Bronze Age Shoddy, and the first paragraph mentions that she's 29 and childless, and I was like, "Okay, so a eunuch, like a right-wing eunuch."
Yeah.
And that's really depressing on all of those things. This is where I would remind, especially for your Christians in the audience, this is where the parable of the talents is so important. The master wants you to see you working. He does not want you to just bury your talent or to bury your work and to not do anything. So when he comes back, he's going to say that you're lazy, you're wicked, and condemn you to hell. And so you should be working. There are a lot of people who have been very pro, quote unquote, vibe shift, or that they're very optimistic. And I want to see it. I want to have it. Oh Lord, help me with my disbelief. And I do agree with you. It doesn't matter that so and so is not my guy. The question is what are you doing? And if and this has been there's been a lot of discourse. For instance, there was a gentleman who was in the chat earlier by the name of Meta Prime, and he's this whole big parallel society guy, and he wants to do these things, and he's all for it. Yeah, that guy paid a mime, but. Sounds like a really cool VTuber, but he's a mime and he's really silent. But anyways, that would actually be a fun gimmick. But back to the main point is that there is. It doesn't matter if he is. The question is can you ride, I guess, the vibe shift or the changing of the seasons to where you have planted something fruitful? And I've told people all the time. I said if I plant the vine and fig tree that my kids sit under and aren't afraid, then all my life is worth it, right? That's what you because there is no. We have the right wing has great teleology. You're focused on your posterity. You want things to be better after you're gone. The problem is that a lot of people just have consigned themselves, I think, to some very large extent that they're just waiting for the world to end. And this is the big problem that I see with the right. And this is why I like Charles Haywood is that even though he's got that he has maybe an eschatology on how things are going with the regime that I may not be 100% with. The guy knows that the time to build is now while it's still good. Because things 50 years from now will probably be a lot worse because things will tend to get worse before they get better. But if things are good now, we should be using this fruitful season to plant and to do good works and to move forward with that. Because the only thing that I want to hear when I die is thou hast done well, my good and faithful servant. That's all I'm looking forward to. And so if that means that thou hast done well, like good and faithful servant, then I should probably be working and I should be spending 5 talents or 2 talents or 1 talents I have to go out and make more. And that requires me to trade and to talk to people and to evangelize and to build things. And that's why I'm invested in my local community. My parish has started the work and the groundwork to have a food cooperative. So we have sort of a legal way to make sure that our religious, kinsmen have ways to feed themselves in case supply lines or the supply chain gets borked again. Those are the things that you should be building.
So Mr. Frogman.
Yes.
Are you saying that you support usury?
No.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure I'm commanded not to do that. I know we're all Orthodox and such, but we do read our Bibles,
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was
occasionally.
That was kind of an inside joke.
Yeah.
No. Not pro usury.
When you're talking about building and being productive and creative, and I think this is where we started our own company doing fitness and nutrition consulting for our guys to try to help the common problem of extremely online right-wing physique guys. And I think that there's the microplastics in the balls, there's these distinct internet communities, and you've got the theory cell right wing, the guys who have all their political philosophy in the right order. But then, invariably you'll see one of these guys and you'll actually see his body and like everything that he ever talked about. You're like, all right, I can't take you seriously anymore because
Yeah.
you look like a skinny little dweeb or a doughy, greasy guy. But then you've got like the Soul Bras and the Josh Rayner and some of these guys who are legitimately physique maxing, and you get kind of a nerds versus jocks thing going on, the age old conflict. But I think there's something legitimately to the fact that a Christian man in particular has a responsibility, number one, to take care of his body, but number two, to be productive and creative in general. I think this is what we are created for. Man was created and put in the garden to name the animals, which is providing order and structure and identity, being outwardly productive and creative, generating new things. The capacity for creation, even typologically, comes from the man. The man is the one who plants the seed. It comes from him. And part of the extremely online reality is that we've become detached from the real world. We're not actually producing and creating things in the real world. And this has a distinct psychological effect on a man in particular, I think, to not be able to track your own trajectory, to see progress toward goals being accomplished, to see that you're better today than you were yesterday, to actually have metrics that tell you how you have imposed yourself on the world. The thing Cooper brought up earlier, where you had like Sam Harris, who's spurging out about how much of a threat Donald Trump is, or even today you see the regime, the way they react, they treat us like we're a threat, because we are legitimately. If young right-wing men actually organized together and did something together, that would be one of the most powerful things on the planet, because that's just how men are. That's a fact of male psychology. And the fact that they see us as a threat should lend us confidence. We should be confident and bold and be willing to actually make moves, to be willing to actually step out and take risks and create things, rather than being fearful and just waiting for the next thing to come down the line. And if we start doing that, then I think that we begin picking up that momentum. You talked about the vibe shift. The momentum that we could build would depend upon us actually wanting to build that momentum, as opposed to just kind of waiting, like pointing the finger at everyone else. All right, so you're going to go, what? And there's a lot of these things happening. There's stuff happening behind the scenes, people who aren't talking, but who are actually head down building stuff. And the narrative doesn't really take those sort of things into consideration. But I think one of the biggest things that I see holding our guys back is essentially like a lack of imagination and a lack of hope, a lack of genuine hope. I was raised Seventh-day Adventist. I grew up like immersed in this eschatological, crippling. It begins manifesting as a sort of weird Gnosticism where you completely devalue the existing physical world, because it's like, well, this is the fallen world, and pretty soon, it's gonna be the end of time, and then there's gonna be a new world. So this one really doesn't matter that much. It's all the stuff going on in here that matters. I'm very sensitive to that. I grew up around that, and I experienced that, and now I see that same thing at large, even among our guys who have all the right ideas. There isn't an actual, I hate the word, but a praxis. There isn't there's a lot of people who are talking about ideas of what we can do, but not actually the things that we can do. Our good friend Jason at the 2-Bit podcast, he says this so often that people, I think, are ready to hit him. He says the ritual and the reality are one. And from an Orthodox perspective, this should really click, that the rituals that we do they have a tangible effect on reality. The things that you choose to do with yourself, the things you put your hands to, actually change physical reality. They change the world around us. And we have now at our disposal tools through the internet, through the creation of unique financial assets, through the ability to, with remote work and the ability to generate income remotely. You can now conceivably think of getting, 100 people together. Those 100 people all participate in the economy such that they develop $1 million net worth each, and those 100 people all go to a single town, and they go settle that single town. It could be a 10,000 population town. Those families would own that town. and they could begin actually not really worrying about everything happening at the federal level. Because in order to actually be able to influence the stuff at the federal level, you have to be able to have some sort of influence or some sort of sway at the local level. You have to establish yourself at ground zero. And anytime that I see people talk about this, the automatic response, I hear it in my own head. The automatic response is, well, here's what they would do. They would stop you here. They would get in your way here. They would penalize you here. And I'm to the point where I'm like, so fucking what? Of course they are. Of course they are. Nobody's saying that we're not going to have enemies. Nobody's saying that it's going to be easy, but it's necessary. We don't live in a civilization anymore. We have lost our civilization. We live in a primal state with networks of competing tribes, all doing some sort of a technologically advanced version of flinging poo at each other. It's up to us to build that civilization. It's not going to come back. Western civilization's not calling. She stopped calling. She's dead. She's gone. We can derive things from that, but we've lost our civilization. We have to rebuild a civilization. And that means we need to plan for the long game. We have to be looking 10, 20, 50, 100 years out. We have to be planting trees that our grandchildren are going to be able to sit under. But in order to do that, you have to believe that's going to happen. You have to believe there's actually going to be a time 50 years from now and that it's not going to be Mad Max. Because, I mean, if it's Mad Max, well, then you've got a lot bigger issues to be concerned with. But I get the sense that we're in a sort of a lull, like an interregnum period here where things are going to start happening when people choose to make them happen, which seems trite, but it's true. The happening isn't going to happen without us. We have to make the happening happen. And I'm not saying this in a military sense per se. I'm saying in the sense that we don't have capital. We need to be amassing capital together, and we have the tools at our disposal to do that. But it's going to take dedicated, intentional communities that are willing to have this indefatigable optimism about the future. You don't have to be unrealistic. You can be realistic and optimistic, but I think I've been thinking about this for myself because I'm naturally an optimistic person. I naturally want to look on the bright side of everything. And I've begun realizing that I think that there's a need for people who are going to be white-pilled about everything no matter what. Because it's down to a matter of perspective. Whether you want to be black-pilled or white-pilled, whether you want to accept the doomer outlook, or whether you want to be, the optimistic, peaceful soy jack looking off into the sunset, you can be either one. You can legitimately look at any single event and decide this is how this thing is a white pill or this is how this thing is a black pill. It's a conscious choice to choose the doomerist view. And the doomerist view is ultimately self-defeating. The people who commit themselves to doomerism are working against their own ends. It's strictly counterproductive. I guess that was just a rant I had to get off my chest.
So go pick up heavy shit and go outside and ameliorate your Kierkegaardian angst, Zoomers.
Yeah.
Lift weights, touch grass. It's usually those are good pieces of advice to follow, right?
Good place.
No, but I mean, at the end of the day, right? Those are true things. Like I had mentioned earlier, the master doesn't want to see you waiting, and as Dave the Distributus likes to crip so much from 40K, and this isn't, it's just that this is a war of belief. Going to be, are you actually going to act on your belief, or is it just going to be a nice, comfy, warm, fuzzy platitude that you tell yourself? Like to some extent, there is the ritualistic aspect of saying nothing ever happens. Because if you incant that and you're trying to put on some kind of magic spell that nothing ever happens to validate your own worldview, despite the fact that you're partaking in a 24-hour news cycle every single day where discursive events become tomorrow's news headlines, then it's kind of on you, right? But
that's goonacry.
Yeah, it's it's basically right. Like, you can stay on your community of goonocracy and just make it work from there. But the problem that you were saying, like how that instant thought in your brain is like how they're going to screw you over or whatnot. Like, yeah, I mean, like I don't think that stopped Nate Fisher and the new founding guys from having Jason Wilson and James Lindsay call them out for trying to start some sort of town project or whatever. Like, if anything, that just means that you're on the right track. And if you're, what's the old phrase? Like, if you're getting flack, you're on target. And that does illustrate that you're going to have to do some good and to do things. And this, I think, comes back to the issue that on the theory cell side or things, they'll say like, oh, the world needs to be re-enchanted. And I will eventually get this stupid essay out. I'm almost finished with it. I had to get some edits through, but about that subject, because one of the things about enchantment requires you to answer the call to adventure. Not that Joseph Campbell was right on his thesis of the monomyth, but he is right in the sense that his hero's journey has been the technique from which all great narratives have been told. And if we are going to be writing our own history to escape history, then we are going to have to take that call to adventure. And the nice thing is that for our generation, for people younger than us, that thank God there are still some competent mid-50s white guys that are looking around the world right now thinking, you've got to be shitting me. This is what we have to do? Whew, this is bad. And those guys you want to talk to. So like, yeah, I'm going to talk to the Jeremy Carls of the world. Yeah, I'm going to talk to the the more successful captains of industry. I want to talk to people like Huntsman, who are logistics experts. I want to talk to Eric Prince. I'd love to shake that man's hand and just say, thank you, sir. Please take over the country. But those are the things you have to do. You have to talk to people like Eric Prince. You have to learn from them. And I mean, this also starts at home. If you have a semi-decent relationship with your parents, or even if you have a good relationship with your parents, like, do you know your father's trade? Do you know the same technical skills that he knows? Does your wife know the same things that her mother knew about how to raise kids or how to like take care of things around the house with comics? Like, if you don't, that's a really good place to start. And you know, some can say that this sounds like a Peterson rant. The problem with Peterson is that Peterson never took it to the logical conclusion, accepted Christ, and started acting. Instead, he's unfortunately been captured by the evil one and now works for a bunch of zany Zionists. But that's, you know, unfortunately, that's why I think Jonathan Pajot, despite how maybe normie he can be, he hasn't stopped trying to save Peterson's soul, and God will reward him handsomely for that in this life or the next.
Yeah, you know, when you reject logos, you kind of start doing stupid things.
Yeah.
It literally makes you dumb.
It sure does.
And this is one of the beautiful things about humanity, or a beautiful thing about the Orthodoxy's perspective on humanity. It's not even Orthodoxy's perspective. I mean, this is just reality, and Orthodoxy recognizes the reality. But on Lord of Spirits, they said recently that when they put it this way, it clicked for me, and I was like, I should have realized this before, but it really there was power in it. Was that the logos is human. The ordering principle of reality is human, which fundamentally should be a cause for great peace and optimism. If your fear is like the destruction of humanity, well, we already know the end. We know what's going to happen, and we know with a proper anthropology, proper theology, proper ontology, you understand if the ordering principle of reality is human, then you can't be a doomer about humanity. To be a doomer about humanity is to embody the anti-Christian perspective. That's it by definition. Being a doomer is antichrist, is an antichrist perspective. So, yeah, there's.
Well, that's the big consequence of living so discarnately. Is that if you live discarnately, to some extension, you are becoming the very Gnostics that people like. I know people like to throw around that word a lot, and I think they use it oftentimes in the incorrect context. But when you are rejecting the actual like fleshly world that you're around and not building, and instead being myopic and ready to just watch the world end and tweet about it live until no one sees your tweets anymore as the bombs go off, all that you've done is that you have rejected the life and the world that has been created for you and by the creator. And to reject that, I think, is a great mistake, not only for your soul, but for the world that you are supposed to be the steward of. And so again, like, if we are living in a discarnate world, it is going to be up to the people that opt to live incarnately. And if by accepting that incarnate life, that means living out your ritual, living out your beliefs, and to do exactly what the master has told you, which is to work and to do and to build and to take up your cross. And if you're not taking up your cross and you're just tweeting about taking up your cross, that's not going to end well for you. And that's very blatantly clear with how we see things online. Like it's the rich man being very upset when he's being told to sell your possessions and to give to the poor. Like we're going to justify ourselves. We're going to try and trick them by asking who is our neighbor. And at the end of it all, like I think the answers are pretty clear. Like you're going to have to do something. That does not mean go jump in a truck or try and get a hold of a Toyota Helix. I don't think we're at that point yet. Maybe one day, but not right now. In the meantime, that means trying to build basic formats of community and structure. And, it would be really good. And this is sort of one of the plans of the Old Glory Club is to have chapters in all the countries so that if you have to do like a cross-country road trip, you have friends in all 50 states that agree with you, won't rat you out to people, and aren't going to like try and kill you simply because you're a conservative, and that you can like more or less couch surf your way to the other side of the country. And that's a very feasible goal, I think. And if it means that things are still going to be rough, at least you have a community. At least you have, dare I say, I don't know, maybe this this new covenant that we've all been adopted into that we can survive in. And so that's sort of the good point maybe to wrap this sort of talk up is just that, yeah, there might be people out there that we disagree with. Lord knows that, there have been plenty of Caesars and kings and persecutors in the world that have allowed us to thrive. And if that's the case, then, this sort of pressure cooker that we're in is either going to create a really good dish or we're going to just sit out there like ingredients never used and we're going to rot away.
You heard it here first, Chuds. Gunagri is Antichrist.
Mr. Prudentialist, thank you, sir. This has been awesome.
You know what, Cooper,
almost
you're an
killed him.
excellent performance artist. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, but I appreciate the commitment to the bit.
I just inhaled some raspberry bubbly, the sponsor of our stream today.
There you go.
Tell our people where they can find you, sir.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Matt and Cooper. It's a great pleasure. I love that. Thanks so much. It's a resounding endorsement, your coughs. But you guys can find me over on YouTube, Twitter, Telegram. All of my links can be found at a lovely website called findmyfriends.net/theprudentialist. It is like an cancel-proof link tree made by our good friend Charlemagne, and that allows you to find out podcast platforms stack. And I'm often a recurring guest on the Oren McIntyre show. We have a running gag that I am his most restrained extremist. So you can find me over there on the last couple of weeks of his show. But thank you, gentlemen, for allowing me to come on and ramble and rant. It's been a great time talking to you. And like you said at the beginning, this conversation was a long time coming.
Mr. Frogman,
yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been real.
We have... Some of this stuff you're talking about, the Old Glory Club, putting together IRL communities and stuff, we've got some plans of our own we're putting together. One of the great things about these sort of networks is that you can't have too many of them. It's not like this is a product or a service that you have to try to corner the market on. The more little organizations like this that we can develop and actually use to improve our IRL lives and begin to merge our families together, and that sounded worse than I meant for it to, but you know what I mean. We're working on some of that ourselves.
Roll
if
Tide.
you guys want to participate with us in that, you can join the Kingpilled Discord server. Go to subscribestar.com/kingpilled for right now. If you go there and it doesn't work, that means, and you're listening to this in the future, that means go to kingpilled.com. Kingpilled.com is not up yet, but it will be soon. And you can come join us. We've got some actual tangible plans, some specific things that we're working on that we'll make public here in the not too distant future.
We have not yet decided whether or not it's going to be kingpilled.com or the hyperboreanlodge.com. So if it's not one, try the other.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we are very organized in all of this because we are businessmen. So to those of you who are watching live, I have put in the redirect to you guys can go raid the 2-Bit podcast. He's live right now. They're having a good conversation. So we've got 80 people watching live right now. If we can get all of you guys to all stream your way on over to the 2-Bit podcast, just sit here and let the stream expire, and you should automatically be redirected, and just let them know that King Pilled sent you. That being said, thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe, like the stream, and we will talk to you next time.